In the quiet halls of European military academies before the Second World War, war was treated like a clean equation. Maps were drawn with rulers, arrows moved neatly across borders, and victory was imagined as something achieved by steel, numbers, and perfect timing. In one of those halls, a respected German war strategist spoke confidently about how wars were won. He believed discipline crushed chaos. He believed modern armies made irregular fighters irrelevant. And when the topic of Filipino guerrilla warfare came up, he dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Poorly armed locals, he said, could never stand against a modern military machine. At the time, his opinion sounded reasonable to many. Europe had watched blitzkrieg tear through countries in weeks. Tanks, aircraft, and organized infantry seemed unstoppable. Guerrilla tactics were considered desperate, primitive, and ultimately ineffective against a trained force. The strategist's words were recorded, repeated, and taught. The lesson was simple. Unconventional fighters could annoy an army, but they could never truly challenge it. Far away from those classrooms, in the heat and humidity of the Philippine Islands, life was already preparing a different answer. The Philippines is not a land that gives itself easily. It is a maze of more than 7,000 islands, wrapped in thick jungles, sharp mountains, swamps, rivers, and coastlines that stretch endlessly. Villages are tucked into valleys. Forests breathe and move. Paths appear and disappear with the rain. For centuries, Filipinos had learned how to live with this land, not against it. They learned how to disappear into it when danger came. When World War II reached the Pacific and the Philippines fell under Japanese occupation, the reality on the ground shattered every clean theory written in distant offices. The enemy arrived with superior weapons, clear command structures, and confidence. On paper, resistance looked hopeless. But paper does not understand hunger, loss, or the quiet fury of people defending their homes. Filipino soldiers who survived the initial battles did not surrender their will when they lost their uniforms. Farmers, teachers, fishermen, students, and former policemen became something else entirely. They became shadows. They became listeners. They became planners. They became guerrillas. There was no grand announcement, no dramatic beginning. Resistance grew slowly, like roots pushing through stone. Small groups formed in villages. Messages were passed through whispers. A sack of rice hidden here. A rifle buried there. Children learned which paths not to mention to strangers. Women memorized signals that meant danger or safety. The land itself became part of the resistance. The guerrillas did not fight the way European strategists expected wars to be fought. They did not hold territory in neat lines. They did not seek open battles unless survival demanded it. They studied their enemy patiently. They learned routines. They watched supply routes. They counted footsteps and listened to engines. When they struck, it was sudden and precise. A patrol vanished in the jungle. A bridge collapsed at night. A supply convoy burned without warning. Then silence. No enemy to chase. No battlefield to claim. To an occupying force trained for conventional warfare, this was deeply unsettling. Soldiers began to fear the trees, the villages, even the quiet. Every local face became a question mark. Every road felt unsafe. Control, which looked absolute on maps, became fragile in reality. The German strategist's belief that guerrilla warfare was ineffective began to collapse, not in Europe, but in the lived experience of war across the Philippines. What made Filipino guerrilla warfare especially powerful was not just tactics, but unity between fighters and civilians. Guerrillas were not outsiders hiding among the people. They were the people. A fisherman by day might guide fighters by night. A farmer might pass information through the way he arranged his goods at the market. Churches, schools, and homes became silent nodes in a living network of resistance. Even when supplies were scarce, creativity filled the gap. Weapons were repaired endlessly. Ammunition was reused. Intelligence became more valuable than bullets. Knowing when not to fight saved more lives than charging blindly into battle. As months turned into years, the occupation forces realized something unsettling. They were winning battles, but losing control. Roads belonged to them only in daylight. Jungles belonged to someone else entirely. The longer the war dragged on, the stronger the guerrilla networks became. Experience sharpened them. Loss hardened their resolve. Meanwhile, reports began reaching Allied command. American officers, some initially skeptical, started to understand the true value of Filipino guerrillas. They were not just surviving. They were shaping the battlefield. They gathered intelligence on enemy positions, troop movements, and fortifications. They rescued downed pilots. They sabotaged infrastructure at critical moments. When Allied forces finally prepared to return to the Philippines, they did not arrive blind. They arrived guided by men and women who had never stopped fighting. In Leyte, Luzon, and beyond, guerrillas emerged from forests and mountains to coordinate with returning troops. Suddenly, the occupying forces faced pressure from all sides. What had once seemed like scattered resistance revealed itself as a deeply rooted, organized force that had waited patiently for the right moment. The world took notice. Military analysts began to study what had happened. How had lightly equipped fighters endured against a modern army? How had control slipped so thoroughly despite overwhelming force? The answers pointed again and again to the same truths the German strategist had dismissed. Terrain matters. Culture matters. Willpower matters. And war is not only fought by those in uniform. After the war, doctrines quietly changed. Counterinsurgency manuals were rewritten. Military schools added new chapters. Guerrilla warfare was no longer treated as an afterthought. It was studied seriously, sometimes nervously. The lessons learned in the Philippines echoed later in conflicts across Asia, Africa, and beyond. The German strategist's confidence did not survive history. His certainty faded, replaced by evidence written in ambushes, intelligence reports, and liberated towns. The world learned that strength is not only measured in firepower, but in adaptability. Not only in command, but in connection. For Filipinos, the story was never about proving a theory wrong. It was about survival, dignity, and home. The guerrilla fighter was not chasing glory. He was protecting his family. She was preserving a future. They fought because surrender meant losing more than territory. It meant losing identity. Long after the guns fell silent, the memory of that resistance remained. It lived in stories told by grandparents, in unmarked graves in the jungle, in quiet pride passed down through generations. The land remembered too. Paths once used for ambushes became foot trails again. Rivers flowed without carrying secrets. But the lesson stayed. War does not always belong to the strongest army. Sometimes it belongs to those who refuse to disappear, even when the world expects them to. And that is what shocked the world most of all.